Thank you very much, Mr. Fly, for joining us. Your perspective as CEO of Freedom House, former President of Radio Free Europe, Counselor to Secretary Marco Rubio, and a leading expert on international affairs is particularly valuable to our audience. This is especially true given Freedom House's active engagement on developments in Georgia this week. But since this program examines the wider geopolitical landscape, I would like to start with Ukraine, which has shown remarkable progress. The images emerging from Moscow have become a powerful symbol of this new reality. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that if Ukraine burns, Moscow will burn as well. We're now seeing the war return to Russian soil like a boomerang. What psychological and military consequences could this have for Vladimir Putin and for Russia's broader war effort?
Yeah, I think you're right that these are the results of Putin's illegal attempt to take over Ukraine. And I think more and more Russian citizens are now realizing that this is not just a limited special military operation. This has now gone on for years. It's affected the Russian economy. And now it's affecting people's lives in major Russian cities. And so the Ukrainians continue to show amazing courage and resilience, despite the limited resources that they have to fight this war. And so we will have to see what the Kremlin's reaction is and whether this starts to move us to a new phase of the conflict.
And what impact will the G7 summit have on this process? We also saw in Evian that transatlantic unity in support of Ukraine and against Putin has strengthened. Do you think this unity will be sustained?
I think that's a bit more difficult. I think the challenge here is that Washington is distracted by other issues. President Trump clearly has said that he wants the war to end, but he has not been able to, and his team have not been able to focus on it significantly because of the situation in Iran. There's a lot of focus here on the Western Hemisphere, America's own neighborhood. And so it's really the European financial and military support that has been incredibly helpful to Ukraine at this critical phase of the war. The U.S. is obviously still playing a limited supporting role. But I don't know that I would see a huge shift in Trump administration approach on the conflict. I think if it looks like the Ukrainian pressure on Putin creates an opening for further talks, I could see the Trump administration getting involved. But they are preoccupied with many global issues. And so the Europeans are going to need to continue to step up their support for Ukraine and make sure Ukraine has the weapons and assistance they need to win.
Yes, we see that Europe is active, but U.S. support carries different weight for both Ukraine and Georgia. So I would like to turn to Georgia now. As you are aware, we are currently in an extremely difficult situation, a country captured by Russian oligarch who is taking away Georgia's future, where innocent people fighting for Georgia's Western future are in prison. We also saw an excellent Freedom House article stating that relations cannot be normalized without the release of political prisoners. How important is it that the Trump administration maintains this position?
I think it's incredibly important because clearly the will of the Georgian people is to have closer ties with the West, to be part of the European Union, to engage more deeply with the United States. And yet the Georgia Dream government over time has taken steps to not just block that path, which would lead to more development, more opportunities for the Georgian citizens, but now is actually undermining key tenets of Georgia's democracy. And so at Freedom House, where we document every year the state of global freedom through products like our Freedom of the World, we have tracked for several years now a consistent decline in freedom in Georgia, and looking at the attacks on peaceful protesters, the jailing of people who have just gone out to protest, the targeting of opposition parties as well as figures, the new foreign agent law, which continually is being pushed. These are all things that undermine Georgia's democracy, and take it off that path to closer ties with the EU and the US. And so I don't think this is a government right now that should be rewarded with deeper connections to the United States, whether economically or diplomatically.
We will return to this topic later, but I want to move to a very sensitive and important issue concerning political prisoner Elena Gogsadze. Her condition is very serious. She is a political prisoner and a mother of four. She has a severe medical condition, and the regime still does not allow her proper medical treatment. Should there be external pressure on Ivanishvili to ensure, first, the end of Elena's unlawful imprisonment, and second, that she receives proper medical care?
I mean, we completely support that. And at Freedom House, we advocate on behalf of political prisoners around the globe. And in her case, as far as I understand it, it's clearly an example of someone who is expressing free speech, freely assembling with others to make their views known. And to be jailed and targeted just because of that obviously shows that you don't have respect for fundamental freedoms as a government if you're targeting people in that case. And then even beyond that, once you're in prison, if you have these extenuating circumstances, obviously it deserves special scrutiny and treatment. And so we would join those who are calling for her to be released because of these medical issues as soon as possible.
Moreover, Elena Gogsadze is a brave and outstanding politician, and I would like to repeat, a mother of four, was arrested simply for writing on a Tbilisi mayor campaign billboard that Georgian Dream is Russian. For those words alone, she was imprisoned for an year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, this is the concerning thing that we have tracked through Freedom in the World. In our index, we've seen a 4-point decline last year alone in Georgia in terms of respect for fundamental freedoms. And it's that targeting of people for exercising their free speech, for just assembling. Again, I mentioned targeting the political parties. We've seen effects on academic freedom, freedom of movement. These are all concerning developments which take Georgia in the opposite direction from deeper ties to the European Union and the United States. And that's where the United States does have leverage, and this administration does have leverage that they can exercise to put pressure on Georgia Dream and Ivashvili to halt this deterioration of Georgian democracy.
Yes, this is very important now. Otherwise, Ivanishvili will try to fully formalize a dictatorship here. We already see that he wants his authoritarian style of governance to be accepted and normalized by the West, and for the West to do business with him just like with other authoritarian leaders. At the same time, he hopes to attract the US president with economic projects as a Trump Tower type development. However, we see that so far the United States has not changed its position. In your view, how realistic is this strategy, and can it truly change the US approach toward Georgia's leadership?
I don't think these tactics will work. The Georgia Dream government has, in addition to collaborating with Putin's Russia, has tried to deepen ties between Georgia and the Iranian clerical regime. They've obviously invited in more engagement from Beijing on the Communist Party of China. These are not friends of the United States. I think the Trump administration is very sophisticated when it comes to analyzing what other governments are trying to do, who they're choosing as their partners, and factors that in as the Trump administration then makes decisions about what bilateral policy should be with particular countries. But to return to one fundamental point, these are also actions that are fundamentally, as far as I understand, I've been to Georgia many times, are out of step with the will and the aspirations of the Georgian people, who have repeatedly made clear that they want their country to be part of Europe, to have the full benefits of being a member of the EU. And we've seen that opportunity presented to Georgia Dream, and then Georgia Dream basically turn it down and step away from that. Not a decision in Brussels, but a decision made in Tbilisi by the current government. And so I think the United States, including under this administration, has watched all that very carefully. and has their eyes wide open about what Ivanishvili and Georgia Dream are trying to do. And so there is a debate, obviously, about how far the U.S. should go in terms of using leverage. I think that will play out. There's a lot of bipartisan support for the Georgian people and deeper U.S.-Georgian ties under the right circumstances here in Washington, and I think that will continue.
Under what conditions could Georgia return to the U.S. strategic focus, leading to stronger pressure on Ivanishvili? It is clear that he has failed to get sanctions lifted, but this is not enough.
I think the challenge here in Washington, as I mentioned earlier, is people are preoccupied with many global challenges. There's also been a rebalancing in terms of the U.S. engagement, particularly in Europe and Eurasia. I think there's a desire that the European governments take on more responsibility, given that this is their immediate neighborhood. A lot of these debates in Georgia are about a potential future member of the European Union. Brussels, the national capitals, should drive a lot of that conversation. And so while I do think the U.S. should do more, and there are many advocates who will support additional U.S. pressure on Georgia Dream, at the end of the day, this should be a priority of European governments. And so we also need to see whether it's France, Germany, others, in addition to those in Central Europe who have always stood with the Georgian people, we need to see more European leaders make Georgia a priority and engage and push Georgia Dream in the right direction.
Yes, we also want both Europe and United States to respond more actively to democratic backsliding in Georgia. However, major geopolitical changes are taking place in the region, including the so-called Tree Project and Armenia's increasing role. In your assessment, how possible is it for the region to remain stable and fully functional without Georgia's active participation?
No, I think long-term, Georgia needs to be part of that strategic conversation. That's where, again, Georgia Dream is hindering the country's ability to be engaged in the same way as its neighbors. And obviously, Armenia, as you noted, with Pashinyan's recent victory, also Azerbaijan, which obviously has not made really any democratic progress, but strategically has engaged the Trump administration. They are receiving a lot of attention, high-level visits, engagement from the administration. And Georgia Dream, because of its choices and because not just of its engagement with the Kremlin, but also, as you noted, partnering with Iran, China, and others, has largely been left out of that up until now. That also is harmful to Georgia's future and to a long-term benefit of the Georgian people. And so I think these are concerning things for Georgia. I don't think that Georgia Dream's actions, though, and even attempts to engage just on economic partnership will really go anywhere in the near term with this administration because of all the reasons I outlined earlier.
Since you mentioned Europe's role several times, I would like to continue with the European Parliament report, which is much stricter than other reports. It calls for sanctions against leaders of Georgian Dream and their propaganda networks, including the Communication Regulatory Commission, which has effectively become a censorship and financial enforcement tool. After Hungary's veto was overridden, this process may now move forward successfully in Europe. Should the United States adopt the same approach?
I'd be supportive of that because of the issues you outlined. I think, though, given the politics here right now and given the lack of attention on many parts of the world, including the Caucasus here, I think this is another area where European leadership is essential. And if the Europeans do move forward now that the constellation of views in the EU has shifted because of the elections in Hungary, I think it makes it more likely then that a debate will result here in Washington, starting the Congress most likely, but ultimately ending with the administration to add additional sanctions. But we're just in a different environment. The U.S. is not always going to be the leading actor in each of these crises. And this is one, I think, where even a lot of people in Washington will look to see, are the Europeans taking the first step? And if so, perhaps then the Trump administration would also follow.
So the roles seem reversed, US and EU. In the past, it was opposite. I want to summarize once again the process taking place in Georgia and review the country's trajectory using your organization's own criteria. According to Freedom House data, Georgia's democracy score has fallen from about 47 to 34% since 2012, while its freedom in the world score has declined from 58 in 2024 to 51 in 2026. Georgia remains classified as a partially free country and a transitional hybrid regime. Practically, what does this decline mean, and how should Georgian and international society interpret it?
It's an important question. I mean, we are seeing, to put it in context, we are seeing a global democratic recession right now. So we've documented 20 years of global democratic decline. But the sorts of declines you've just mentioned, which are accurate and that we've seen in Freedom of the World, our annual report, are significant. Dropping 4 points in 1 year alone is significant. Dropping in the categories that caused that drop, which I mentioned earlier too, targeting of political parties, the limitations on academic freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement. I mean, these are all the core areas that we track as part of Freedom of the World. And we're seeing declines across most of them in Georgia over several years. So this is not just a one-off. This is not just 1 year and then things improve. This is obviously structural and systemic. And again, any of us who have been visiting Georgia for years have seen it firsthand too, as we visited Georgia. And so it's concerning. It's going to take sustained effort to reverse that decline. It's not just going to be one free and fair election that ultimately brings in different leadership that changes things. Clearly over time, institutions are corroded and corrupted and need to be restored. I would like to see both Europe and the United States do more to support Georgian civil society. A lot of those programs were cut last year. I think there's a lot that both the United States and Europe could be doing to restart that work at this critical moment for Georgia. I don't think all is lost yet. There's still potential to turn things around, but it's going to require a lot of work.
The media is also in a very difficult situation. And we cannot end this discussion without asking about Iran. A memorandum of understanding was signed between the United States and Iran, which received very mixed and contradicted reactions. How do you view this process? Did the United States achieve what it wanted? And is the Iranian regime now more constrained than before the war?
I think it's a mixed bag, to be frank. I think the administration at this point was mostly focused on just ending the immediate conflict. Clearly, they did not achieve all of the goals that they set out to at the beginning of the military operations. Having said that, because of the sustained nature of the conflict, because of the significance of the damage that was done to Iran's standing in the region, its ballistic missile program, its nuclear program, its leadership, I do think Iran is weaker right now than it was militarily before the conflict. Having said that, it obviously discovered through its pressure on the Strait of Hormuz that it has a lot of leverage. And so it will be more difficult going forward, I think, to have a deterrent against Iran and maybe to roll back some capabilities that they try to restore. But again, I think the administration was mostly focused on the near-term political goal of ending the conflict and easing some of the economic pressure that it has exerted, not just on the United States, but globally.
Thank you. And finally, what message would you send to the Georgian people who are fighting for freedom and European future?
I think the Georgian people have been incredibly courageous and inspiring to all of us who have watched. I was there in 2024 as part of an election observation mission. I saw what happened with the elections. I followed very closely the aftermath and the continued targeting of civil society and the opposition. We'll continue at Freedom House to advocate against this democratic backsliding, to support those who have been unjustly imprisoned because of their activism, and to highlight the cause of Georgia, as we tried to do this week with our awarding of former President Ivanishvili with our Ambassador Mark Palmer Award. And so Freedom House will continue to be a friend and a supporter of the Georgian people in Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Fly, for this interview.
Great. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye.